before the drop, you can't ignore it. I'm transforming now these cars and planes, I'm always boarding. Just out touring down in Charlotte like I play for Hornets. When I'm performing, never boring, now you can't afford it. Champagne Perrier, finish friends on my face. Looking like I'm from the deep. These no Cartiers. Pockets deep, 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 bro. I can make it in my seat, bro. Do you, I'm doing me, bro. Making noise, use a beat, bro. Whoa. I press the button and the doors go off like, whoa. That money clip us now, the new now looks like, whoa. Upgrade her diamonds, now her girlfriends are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Neighborhood on the scene, neighborhood on the strip. Neighborhood be the name, neighborhood no crib.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to We Came to Win, Reflections on Narrative Power in the 2020 election, presented by ReFrame in collaboration with Distant Signals. My name is Renee Mowat. We had some technical difficulties. EVA, are you there?
I got it, and I'm EVA.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. And we're your hosts for this evening. So now, guys, 2020 has been a lot. You know, Miss Rona has been traveling the globe, and we're currently on month 9 of quarantine. And honestly, if we left it at that, it would definitely be enough, okay? But this year, we've also seen the rise of the largest demonstrations for racial justice in U.S. history, the highest rate of voter turnout our country has ever seen, and to top it all off, a significant defeat of Trumpism at the polls.
Mm-hmm. But y'all know that. That's why you've tuned in to us tonight. This year, we've also seen amazing leadership from multiracial movements led by Black people and people of color on the national stage. Defund the police was discussed from the halls of Congress to dinner tables across the country. Electoral maps shifted for the first time in decades in some states, and people power was being built for the long haul.
We have a great conversation lined up for everybody this evening. But before we introduce our amazing panelists, we'd like to take a minute to tell you who we are. Now, ReFrame and This Is Signals build narrative power to change society. We believe narrative power must be built from the ground up so that narratives can gain widespread traction and so that the process of narrative development can model the power shift we need in society at large.
At ReFrame, we use training, mentorships, fellowships, and accompaniment to invest in the people, organizations, and networks that build narrative power across the country. At This Is Signals, we do narrative analysis by combing through news articles, social media content, and websites to identify trends in conversations, messages, and stories. We then develop and pass on narrative insights and action to people, organizations, and networks to support their narrative power building work.
And tonight, we're joined by some awesome narrative power builders, okay? And to kick us into gear for our guests, though, and set up this evening's conversation a little bit more, we wanted to share 3 insights from the last several months of work that we've been doing.
So our first insight is about where we should focus our energy versus where we should absolutely not. So we have to avoid the trap of using this moment to only critique the incoming administration, no matter how tempting that may be. Caveat here, we can critique, and we definitely should, but we should also focus our energy on ensuring that the administration supports progressive appointments and progressive legislation like the Breathe Act and the Green New Deal. We should definitely take advantage of the momentum in this moment, uplift our beliefs, and ensure that our messages are also lifted and accepted by a wider audience. That's really how we win.
And our second insight comes from our mis- and disinformation research. We know disinformation, which is historically known as propaganda, is not new. And while QAnon, Pizzagate, Bill Gates conspiracies, and other wild conspiracy theories may seem nonsensical, people believe them because they feed into old narratives of distrust in government and elites. And it's important to track this kind of disinformation because it can often give us an early sign of how stories will spin and give us an edge in our strategy. And then once we know what disinformation is gaining traction with our audiences, we can seed counter narratives that discredit and advance new common sense about the issues that are at hand. And here's a quick shameless plug. If you want to learn more about disinfo and how to combat it in your spaces, you can find more information on ReFrame's website in their Disinfo Defense Toolkit.
Love the shameless plug. Keep it coming. Okay. So our third and final insight is really just because something's popping on your timeline does not mean that it's popping for everybody else. The stuff that trends on platforms are not always the dominant narratives that we see in media outlets or what we're hearing on the streets, the phones, the doors, WhatsApp groups. You get what I'm saying here.
Yep,
What's dominating for one, what's dominating for one community may not be dominant for another. For example, in anti-lockdown groups on Facebook, anti-big government sentiment and conspiracy theories run pretty much unchecked there, while other communities' Facebook groups are focused on staying home and staying safe. This is why tracking narratives across different audiences and platforms is really important for any of us trying to create broad narrative shifts beyond our own echo chambers. To create broad narrative shift, we need to continue to lean into stories of people power and stories about the power of organizing. That's why we're here tonight, to share those stories. So tonight, we're talking with 4 amazing narrative strategists and leaders who eat insights like this for breakfast. These are the people who are out there leading day-to-day efforts to shift narrative and build power, while also applying strategic frameworks and creating important models for all of us to look at and learn from. These people, all 4 of them, played critical roles in the last year and before to advance narratives grounded in justice and liberation and winning real change in the world. We're super excited to talk with them about their work and to really gather some of that wisdom that they're really happy to share with us this evening.
Okay, everybody, it's time to introduce our panelists.
Let's
First up,
do it.
you ready?
Yeah.
First up, we have Abril Gilardo. Abril is the communications director of Lucha and part of ReFrame's advisory committee. Abril has been organizing for the last decade, and some of her notable wins include defeating Joe Arpaio, raising the minimum wage in Arizona, and defeating Trump. Next up, we have Amy Castanel. Amy Castanel is the Southeast Region Communication Director for the Working Families Party and lives in Atlanta. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in online advocacy, digital strategy, and change communications with a focus on racial justice, human rights, voter engagement among communities of color, and economic justice.
Okay, next up we have Jacob Swenson Lengel, the Director of Narrative and Communications at Pennsylvania Stand Up and an editor at The Organizing Upgrade. Jacob is a narrative strategist, writer, and trainer with almost a decade of experience working at the intersection of big ideas and collective action. Welcome, Jacob. So happy to have you here. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we have Minister Janae Bates. Minister Bates is the Communications Director for Faith in Minnesota and Isaiah, where she specializes in integrating grassroots faith-based organizing and narrative strategy. With over a decade of academic and professional experience in ministry, social justice, and communications, Janae has helped develop and implement race-class narrative framework in both Minnesota and across the United States.
Well, welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Well, now that we have all your bios and intros out the way, let's get into the real nitty-gritty, shall we? So, first question this evening for the panel. What are the top 3 lessons you've learned from building narrative power and winning in 2020 in each of your states? Abril, you're up first.
Thank you, everyone. Hello to everyone. It's so good to see familiar faces. And hello to everyone who is watching us. That is a really good question. I think, like you all mentioned earlier, it has been quite a year for a lot of us. And I think thinking and reflecting after these elections, really, what have we learned? What are the lessons that we're going to take? What are some of the challenges? I feel like I'm still processing some of that. But the one thing I really, it's on my heart, it has been on my heart throughout this time is 3 things. 1 is owning our power. 2, we are the experts. And 3, we need to continue to contest for power. And what do I mean by that? When I say owning our power, I think about Azucena, who was one of our canvassers. And Azucena was knocking on a door, and she had this mom telling her that she was not going to vote. Not only would she worry about her finances at home, putting food on the table, but also her mom had just been deported. And you had Azucena, this young woman of color, with all her corazón, with all her heart, just stood there, listened, and told her, this is exactly why you need to vote. You need to be the voice of your mom. And I think when I'm saying owning your power, this is one example of dozens and hundreds of Latinx women who taught me that first lesson, that we must step up in our own power. Being an immigrant, being undocumented, often we're a narrative that has been told is, you don't have power, you don't count. But that is not true. We have so much power. We have so much political power when we march, when we advocate, when we get others, like Azucena, to vote. And so for a decade, we've been building infrastructure like this that has allowed us to integrate digital and communications to the work that we do with the field and our organizing team. And really to train our members to see themselves as the agents of change. A quick example is this year we created the Lucha Influencer Program, which is our members, not relying on like famous people to tweet us, although that's important, but really to create that infrastructure for our members to become our influencers on our community. We believe, right, that those who are impacted by the issues are the closest to the solution and closest to the people who need to be listening and participating. So that was really exciting. And the other lesson that we learned was, we are the experts, and we always come up with the most boldest, innovative, energized tactics that create the change we want to do or in our states. And so, for example, in Arizona, Sheriff Joe Arpaio attacked our communities. We had our own Trump before Trump, before the nation had Trump. And instead of hiding, undocumented communities came out of the shadows and say basta. And through our fight, we use Zumba, we use music, we use mariachi, we use memes, we use tamales, we use all kinds of tactics that already are part of those communities' culture to mobilize them to get out and vote or to get others out to vote. And finally, I would say, we knew exactly what was going to get our comunidad out. And so the last thing I will say is the lesson is that we need to continue to contest for power. And we started our work at Lucha in 2010 because, to be honest, the Democrat Party in our state abandoned us. And our people were not getting knocks, and they were not getting door hangers or calls or texts. Our people were being left out of the electoral process. And we often, I remember going door to door, and people were they were so intrigued that there was someone at their door talking to them, but they were so excited to have someone at their door asking them about the issues they care, because nobody else had ever asked them. And they were so excited that often they pack snacks to go, a Gatorade because it was so hot in Arizona. I got a tamal. Somebody gave me a tamal to go because they were so grateful that we were there. And our communities are ready to participate. We just need to go and talk to them. And that's something that we are doing at the grassroots level. And we need to continue to push the party, to hold them accountable, to make sure their campaign trails become promises and reality for our communities. So those are some of the lessons. And I know this is not unique to Arizona. I know that it took a village to win protections for our communities. And I know that Amy with the working parties in Georgia also has a lot to share.
Thanks, Ariel. Look, y'all won. We won. We're still winning. We have another election coming up in a few days. We still have 2 Senate seats to figure out in Georgia. But I hear you on being left out of the narrative. I live in Georgia. For decades, Black folks in Georgia have been not just left out, but shut out of actually participating in political process. And a lot of the work that we do at the Working Families Party is to really like reach the folks who have been knocked out of the process and encourage new people to come in and say, like, not only are we going to help you have access to the electoral process, but we're going to demystify a lot of it and also like open doors that have previously been shut. Because some of the lessons that I've learned are that like we can't win when we don't understand our base. We have to know what they need, how they see the world, what they envision for their futures. And that's the only way that you should operate for success, because that kind of success has long lasting results. It's not just one election. It's not just one election cycle, but it's for all time. Like when you show people that like, when you put your work here, when you put your energies here, when you put your like heart and soul and like really fight for the things that you need, then you will never truly lose. Because in electoral, I mean, working in electoral politics, you get a lot of like short-term wins and a lot of losses. And if you view everything as sort of like a zero-sum game, where like the election day is the answer, the end all be all, and then after that it's over, then you will never win, or you will always feel like you're losing because you lose a lot. Like that's just the way it goes. Like you lose a lot because there's a lot on the line and there's a lot against you, quite frankly. And so if you look at it as a building moment, and every loss can be seen as a win, but lucky for us in this instance, we won. So and won big, and we're going to win again in January. But I mean, another thing that I feel like we learned is that watching people of color move into leadership in this moment, when it's done correctly and not just sort of like as a face-saving moment, when it's really done intentionally and correctly, we've seen like amazing things happen. One example is like the way that people have been moving into mutual aid, like organizations who never before had even considered something like this because of the situation with the pandemic, because the way that our government has abandoned us in lots of ways. The organizations have moved into mutual aid and realized that like that is becoming sort of like standard practice, and it should be standard practice moving forward. Resources should not be like hoarded by organizations or people. And like the way that we've seen people sharing things that they never did before has been truly beautiful to me. And it is a way to like sort of reimagine the world and really put forward like, this is what we envision for the future, and we're going to live it now because now is the moment that we have, and we got us always. And that kind of like reinforcement of a message really does build relationships in a way that never would have before. Like you can work with an organization and be like, wow, they really have my same message. Like we really vibe. But if you also know that they also have you, like, I'm starving, here's a fucking sandwich. Oh, sorry. Here's a sandwich. Here's food. Here's like help with your rent. Like all these things. If we understand truly that like we are together in this and we're working with each other, we're moving together, it really does build community. And you need that community in order to go enter into these fights that aren't always easy wins. I think like the last thing that I'll say is that another thing that I've learned is that there is no demand that is too great to ask when it comes from the people who are most directly affected. And I think like a really good example of that is this situation that we had with like the demand to defund the police. Years ago, sorry, my cat is making a noise. Years ago, if you had said defund the police, people will look at you like you are a maniac from Mars. Like they're like, what are you talking about? That's too wild. And now you say it and people ask, okay, how? That is a complete narrative shift that is unbelievably amazing. And we went from like not being able to say that, having it be sort of like a third rail kind of situation, to moving into a space where we now have the Breathe Act. And we have things that are actually actionable. And that is a beautiful thing. And the reason why that exists is because the demand came from movement. It came from people who said like, this is what we need. And it moved forward from there. And that's why it's become such like a powerful sticking point with folks. But I mean, enough out of me. there's other winners here. Jacob, y'all won huge in Pennsylvania. What's going on?
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. It's great to hear what you're doing there in Georgia. So we've been learning a lot. I joined PA Stands Up in May, and in the last 6 months, I've learned just a ton from what we've been doing. I think one of the big takeaways that I have from this work is that narrative strategy is really a team sport. And that's true, I think, of the folks on this call, but it's also true of how we operate inside of our organizations. And to really build narrative power, I think we need to find ways to democratize our communications. When I started doing organizing almost 10 years ago, I was struck by the fact that organizers have all these tools for leadership development, and we have these pathways and ways that we build the leadership of our members. But there's a lot less of that when it comes to communications and narrative strategy. I remember actually, Janae, we talked about this in 2018. And when I came to PA Stands Up this year, I was really interested in trying to change that. And so our organization has 1,500 dues-paying members and 9 chapters. And one of the things I'm proudest of this year is that I helped build a narrative squad of member leaders, about 20 member leaders from our chapters, who are involved in doing communications. And over the course of weekly meetings, 3.5 months, we built up our collective skills. And that really enabled us to bring our work to a much larger scale. When more people are involved in the process, we have a lot more power. And so I think if we're going to keep winning, we've got to do a lot more of that. We need to go beyond just involving paid staff to unlocking the brilliance and creativity of our members, so that they're involved in crafting and executing narrative strategies. Another thing I think that has been an important learning for me is the importance of getting comfortable with complexity and contradiction as we're moving towards building a progressive governing majority. Our chapters were on board with Bernie Sanders in the primary. And so we knew when it was clear that Biden was going to be the nominee that we had a real choice to make about how we were going to talk about Biden and about the election. And I think some organizations out there went kind of whole hog for Biden, and others really avoided talking about Biden altogether in favor of talking about kind of local progressive champions. And we really didn't want to take either route. We wanted to find a way to talk about Biden that named the fact that he wasn't the candidate we wanted, but that we knew we needed to elect him and hold him accountable to delivering for our communities. And we wanted a narrative strategy that was honest and upfront about that. And so when we talked to our members, we did a lot of talking about working people and social movements and how they've been the drivers of history, not presidents, and have pushed presidents to do big things. And then we also, when we were doing deep canvassing conversations with voters, we were also really upfront about the fact that Biden wasn't our first pick either. And I think actually that kind of authentic, honest connection enabled us to build common ground with voters who weren't sure about Biden. And when we could identify shared values, we created space to kind of move past the candidate and talk about what our communities need. And then I think the last learning I have is that leading with values is also really important. If we want to move beyond taking an oppositional stance to creating a new progressive majority, we've got to lead with values. One of the most significant narrative interventions in Pennsylvania this year was the string of dozens of count every vote actions that happened around the state, and I know they happened around the country as well. And, the moment after the election was a really frightening moment in so many ways. And it would have been easy to lean into an oppositional frame where we focused on Trump and the threat that he and his enablers were creating for our communities. And instead, we really stayed focused on the values of democracy, equality, and we overpowered our opposition by centering joy, which was just incredible. And so probably for many folks outside of the state, what happened in Philadelphia was what you saw on TV, with people literally playing Beyonce and like overpowering Trump's press conferences. But that was actually happening in other cities and even small towns around the state. And I think that that's something that we need more of. I mean, Avril, I think you were talking about this too. we have a lot of hard work and big fights ahead, but how we take on those fights matters a lot. And the more that we can make our movement look like a dance party that people can't miss, the better we're going to be. So with that, Janae, I'm pass it over to you to hear more about the work you've been doing in Minnesota.
Thank you, Jacob and Abril and Amy. Oh my gosh, you all are so dope. It makes me even more proud to be a part of ReFrame and this incredible cohort of folks. And so very similar to you, Jacob, this idea of leading with values has been a core part of our work here in Minnesota. And so as you all know, this election season was like any other. It was not the usual 2 to 4 weeks before where we do GOTV. We have literally been doing GOTV since March, right? And so when we're dealing with a pandemic, when George Floyd was murdered here in Minneapolis, we had to very consistently and persistently name what our values were, what we were creating, what we needed, what we deserved as human beings, as people, over and over and over again. And it really started to catch. And so what has been incredibly both strategic about leading with values, but also it's the right thing to do, leading with values, is that it is one of the dopest tools against opposition, to be just like blunt. Like I cannot count how many times in real time I could shut down someone who's coming at us with oppositional messaging when I talk about the things that we're for, the things that we deserve, the things that we need as people, like regardless of race, region, or religion. And when you do that, you push them into a position where they have to say, no, you don't deserve that. No, Black people shouldn't be safe. Like, and when you get them there, it's like, oh, this is the thing you've really been saying the whole time, and you use dog whistles for it, right? And so it's been really just a beautiful thing to be able to do and implement and like have our leaders do. And so, yeah, I cannot stress enough how amazing the ability to do that is. And then speaking of our leaders and our base, I would say the second thing is this idea of being intentional about pulling them into the conspiracy. And what I mean by that, right, is that is like trusting our leaders and our leadership to like have a full-throated conversation about why narrative shift is important, how we all have, social power to move people, in our context, to change the hearts and minds of Minnesotans so that we can have a caring economy and a robust democracy that includes every single person without exception. And when you are like super clear about what our values are and who the villains are with our base, they are ignited and excited and ready to carry that message. And they are just like, it empowers them, emboldens them to go out and do like not just like do the work, but like fully embody it. So our leaders were out writing LTEs, and I didn't even know. I would just be skimming the paper and I would see a leader's name, like, like this is amazing, and and like on message, like ready. They were testifying, showing up in all kinds of spaces. Just a real quick story, our Muslim base, they shout out to the Muslim Coalition of Faith in Minnesota. Those people are incredible. And we have a greater Minnesota city called St. Cloud that has actually had national press in recent years for just having some real hardline, like racist, xenophobic folk. And the senator who was running St. Cloud, who embraced that, had won his seat years ago by like 150 votes. And so our Muslim coalition was like, oh, we need to be in a full conspiracy about moving narrative shift, moving our people, getting them ready. And so they went out and they talked to their people in St. Cloud, and they were like, just to be safe, we're going to get 1,000 people. We're going to actually take 1,000 people to go vote. And then they were like, nah, that's not enough. In the end, they took 5,000 people to go vote. And that senator lost his seat by a couple hundred. So let me tell you, narrative shift works. And it is most certainly what we're all about. And I know I got very little time left, but I just want to say one logistical thing for all the comms folks in the world who will appreciate this. Letting your folks know about how trolls operate online helps them out drastically, because when they see all the trolls, they get discouraged, and then you're like, listen, those are bots. They're not real people. Our values matter. Just don't even listen to them. And like, I can't tell you how many of our leaders were like, there's so many people who are saying horrible things about our beautiful video about a multiracial democracy. And then when they're clear about who they are and how they don't matter, oh, they were on fire and continue to be. So, all right, I talked enough. I think we're ready for our hosts.
This is such a dope conversation. I may be a co-host, but I'm definitely back here taking my notes. Y'all are dropping some gems. Y'all are definitely making it clear to me and folks at home that narrative shift works, period. So I'm excited to ask this next question. And it's actually a two-part question for y'all. So as we inch closer towards 2021, can you tell us what campaign and narrative work is ahead for you and your organizations? And then what narrative and infrastructure should we all be working on together? Janae, you're up first for this one.
Well, I would say most certainly so for us here in Minnesota, we actually created two brands. I was a part of co-creating two, a statewide brand and then a regional brand. So We Make Minnesota is our new brand that we've been using. So shout out to Greater Than Fear. For those who know about Greater Than Fear, we've expanded it into its new iteration. And then we have a regional brand of Deliver Black Dreams. So we've been co-creating these together. So it's We Make Minnesota, Deliver Black Dreams. And so a lot of our work is continuing to advance that. And that brand is being really intentional about both like affirming who we are as Minnesotans, like who Black Minnesotans are, and also the responsibility of all of us. If we really want to like be full-throated about like this idea of even aspiring to the mythological American dream, we have to realize that delivering Black dreams is essential for every single person, regardless of race. And so continuing to do that is really essential for us in Minnesota. And a huge part of making that happen is actually being clear so Minnesota, just FYI, we are the only state in the country that has a divided legislature. So our House is Democrat and our Senate is Republican. And so we have to be super clear that having a divided legislature is not equivalent to a divided government. I actually hate the term divided government because the reality is that the government is we the people, and we aren't divided on the stuff we need. We all need our basic needs met. We all have the similar values about caring for each other and needing to lean fully into that. And so that is going to require us to have like serious conversations about what it means, like what is the government, what is the role of government, and like start to get people really grounded in and make it legible, that we are the government, we the people is us, right? And so as we crystallize that, we know we're in a fight, and it is most certainly a revenue one. And that revenue fight is going to be happening all across the country. Most certainly right here in Minnesota, we're like the second highest state for the largest number ratio of Fortune 500 companies that are housed here. And they don't play their fair share, right? As most big giant corporations don't pay their fair share. Not only do they not pay their fair share, they have made buku money during a pandemic, when people are getting laid off, when essential workers are barely scraping by. We also have giant healthcare corporations who are making an immense, like an insanely evil amount of money. And so when they're making record profits and all the folks are struggling and they don't pay taxes, there's a problem. And so also knowing we're going into legislative session, there's going to be a bunch of states who are grappling with what do we do about, our budgets, knowing that our budgets are moral documents, that they're a moral document that shows how we care for each other. making it that super legible to the public, and being able to declare that we don't want to hear conversations about austerity or cuts at all. That is an abomination. As a matter of fact, let's talk about how you're going to fund our lives in the midst of all this. And so that is like that's going to definitely be the fight that we're having. And I imagine most folks across the states are going to be having it. And so as we, all of us on this call and the folks listening out there, co-conspire and co-create more and more possible for us is going to be an incredible, and I'm excited, actually. I'm really excited because we've shifted so much in the past few months. I think we've made this conversation way more fertile. And so I know Jacob has been doing and will be doing similar work out in PA. So please tell us.
Yeah, I think we're going to be on some of the same terrain as you are, Janae. I think, we're definitely thinking about, in terms of campaigning, we want to deliver a clear message to the incoming Biden administration. It was working class people of all races who delivered the presidency for Joe Biden. And now it's time for Joe Biden to deliver for working class people. And so we're really excited working with other state allies, people who've been critical to putting Joe Biden in office, to really put some pressure on him as he's making cabinet picks and starting to think about his legislative agenda. So we've been in a lot of conversations about, how do we leverage our position as people in swing states who are instrumental to putting him into office to really lobby his administration for the kinds of changes that we need. And then at the state level, we also have a state brand, We Go Together, which we're testing out. We got to try it out in the last few months with allies, and we're going to keep using that going into the legislative session. There's some strong headwinds in our legislature, but we're really excited because we were able to elect a number of our members and organizers to the state ledge. And so that opens up some really exciting possibilities of building a progressive caucus of really aligned folks in the state legislature that we can be working with, and then also doing campaignings around the needs of our communities, really directly at the local level, especially around housing and policing, which are just huge issues in a number of the communities where we're working. And then in terms of narrative, I'm really excited to keep working with our narrative squad. I think we've had an initial sort of experiment here with supporting member leaders in our chapters, but I think there's a lot of work still to be done to figure out how to draw on the talents of our members and create systems and processes so that folks who only have like 5 hours or folks who have 20 hours a week can find a way to plug in and contribute the skills that they have and the passions that they have for communications work. And I'm also really excited to think about how to scale that up in some simple ways too. And maybe this is an idea for our national communications, but I'd really love to build a strong and aligned network of some of our members who are committed to advancing a shared narrative strategy using their individual social media accounts. We're fighting this giant sphere of bots and disinformation, and we need to be building our own strong networks of leaders and kind of products that help align us on narrative and messaging, so that we're not just using our organizational pages, but we have a whole cohort that we're moving with online. And then I think the last thing that I'm interested in doing in terms of narrative is we're really on complex terrain, I feel like, right now, and it's going to be a challenging few years ahead. And so I'm really excited to have more deep conversation around deep narratives that we need to change in our society. Janae, you were talking about the role of government. I think really looking at the structures of racial capitalism, and then also the history of people's struggles in this country for freedom and for equality, and what we can learn from those struggles and how we can talk about them so that we look to our movement elders and are bringing them into the organizing that we're doing. And then I think there's a lot of alignment work around that narrative and that conversation that we need to do so that we're designing campaigns that aren't just sort of the 15-second ad or the 30-second ad, but are the like, you know, let's have a bigger conversation. Let's dig a little bit deeper so that we can really talk about the scale of transformational change that we need in this country. Amy, how about you? What are some of the things that you're planning on doing?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we are, like I mentioned before, we still have these 2 Senate races here in Georgia. And I think, you know, we're building, like the Working Families Party wants to be the party for the people, all the people. And part of that means like using the tools that we have to sort of like build a narrative around what does it mean to be what does a political party mean, and how can we really like understand the structure of the government. Like I was in a conversation earlier today talking about these runoffs in Georgia, and the very idea of like having a runoff system, a lot of people don't understand where that comes from or what the purpose of it, like its original intent was meant to be. And therefore, like if you don't understand what the intention is, you can't really fight it. And so we had this conversation where I explained to folks that like the reason that we have runoff systems and the reason why a lot of states have runoffs is because of the way that the state parties were built in the 60s, essentially, where these racist representatives refused to have like full majority rule government because they were afraid. They were afraid of Black political power back then, just as they are now. And so they created a system that really excludes a lot of people from participating or makes it very difficult for people to participate. And runoffs are an example of that. And they exist in lots of states, not just Georgia. Plenty of states have this system that really limits participation. And if without knowing that, it's hard to understand like how or why to get rid of it. And we are, so that's part of the work that we're doing is like sort of like building political education into the work that we do so that when we're making demands of folks, they really understand why we're doing it, where it comes from. Even this situation that we're seeing now with like the transfer of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, a lot of people don't understand what that should look like and what parts of the government are triggered during this moment. And so it can be very destabilizing, especially when you have like a chaos clown like Donald Trump in there, who's like trying to make you think like all this stuff is happening. You should be scared. So if you don't know what's going on, then everything seems terrifying. But if you use these opportunities as like learning moments, like, oh, well, this is the way that it should look. And then you can see that he's just creating like, it's like more of a show than it is a show of power. Like he's not actually doing anything other than making you think that he's doing something. And so that's kind of the work that we're trying to build into what we're doing as we build the party, as we like build community with people. We're also trying to help people understand and feel like they actually have like their hands around the government so that they can know that like the real power is with the people. And that's why the people need to understand what's happening. We've also seen sort of like a crystallization of all of our demands, like in a real focus coming through and from movement. And so we want to help people understand like the way that movement plays a role in shaping the narrative around what we're doing. And electoral politics will never be able to control movement like movement does what movement does because it's moving. But we can harness that power from movement to create change electorally. And so like that's kind of like the dance that we're trying to do for the rest of this year into the next, and also like moving forward, because we know that like we have things that are coming up. We're looking forward to 2021, where we have things moving locally as well as nationally. Like y'all both mentioned, like we're all going to be working on figuring out like what it looks like to have actual relief. We're all going to be focusing on like how can we actually hold Joe Biden to the things that he's mentioned that he might do. And beyond that, we also know that there's been a lot of energy from the uprisings this summer that we all saw, and we want to take that energy and move it towards the ballot box so that we can get some real change on the books for people in cities and towns across the country so that we can make all of our dreams actually a reality. And one of my dreams is to hear what Abril is going to say.
dream comes true right here. There is definitely a lot of work that still needs to be done on the ground, definitely with narrative work. And one thing, at least here in Arizona, and I'm we're seeing across the country, at least in Arizona, COVID cases are again coming back. And also our legislative session starts in January. So not only do we need to prepare on how to, push legislative pieces of legislature that bring and relief to our communities, but we also had to do it in the middle of a pandemic. And so I think there's like a few things on how we still need to acknowledge that we are in a pandemic, that our lives of many Black and Brown communities are being impacted the most here in our state. And so how do we do that while we still hold the line? And so one thing is that the narrative that we can still do it, we can still win, and we did it, and we show that in these elections, and continue to build that infrastructure that it's needed to decentralize. I think Jacob, you mentioned earlier, and you too, Janae, of decentralizing this comms or narrative that often comes from like paid staff, but that it is actually coming from our members more than ever. We need to, as we are, there's not going to be perhaps an opportunity where members come together to the state capitol and rally. Instead, they're going to have to be pushing these narratives from their homes, and it's so important. And I think it has a lot of value when other people see regular people push, talking about the different issues that are impacting. I really, one of our biggest fight coming up is the budget, or as Janae said it, budgets are moral documents. One of our fight is really like how we're going to show up to our people with all of the budgets that need to be discussed around public education, around COVID relief for not just for all, including immigrant families in our state. So there's some of the more like immediate work that it's going to start as soon as January. I think there's like a larger work that we need to do as we see more and more of the results being like broken down of these elections. One of the things that I'm like wondering is, how do we still talk to Black and Brown men about some of the progressive issues, some of these men who perhaps voted for Trump? How do we ensure that we create a bench of community candidates that we elected and that we now need to co-govern with in this moment? And then I think you all mentioned it, right? Making sure that the Biden administration, all of the promises that were on the campaign trail, that become a reality for our families. And we need, I don't need to, tell everybody, like the immediate release, but at least for my family, there's so many things, from healthcare to immigration to COVID relief. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think there is a beautiful thing that we got us, and I think it is us through our power, through our stories, through our joy, that we're going to be able to really continue to lead with our values, but also and through that win hearts and minds, that will really bring that relief that our communities need in this moment and beyond. And we always talk about how elections are not the finish line, they're a mark. And so there's so much things that we need to continue to do, like political education, someone already mentioned, right? We are starting to call voters already and say, did you vote? Or why did you vote? How was your experience? What else do we need to do? And really prepping for all the legislative fights that are coming to our state capitol. And I think with that, I'll pass it back to the host.
Well, thank y'all everyone for your answers. I'm still dropping gems throughout all this and still taking notes. So our final question for this evening is, what do you want to celebrate? You all lifted up a lot of touching stories about folks on the ground that you work with so closely every day and other national wins across the country. And I'm just curious, what do you want to celebrate? Abril, you're up first.
There's so many things that I think we can celebrate. I think the power that grassroots movement, that the power that we saw this year is kind of like in your face, something that we've been working and that we know we can do it. I think there is like immediate examples as I think celebrating all the frontline workers who woke up every day and put up a mask and gloves and face shields and walk out of their doors. Maybe some couldn't give a kiss to their families because of COVID or because they were scared to, put them in danger. But they were determined to come out because they needed to survive. And they needed to show up for their loved ones and their communities. And this includes frontline workers from private sectors, but also the canvassers, the volunteers, the organizers, all of those people. I want to celebrate their resilience and the resilience of directly impacted people who endure this 2020 electoral cycle despite all the challenges of the pandemic and losses. And we still led, we rise, and we led with a bold and unapologetic spirit. And I think I want to honor that and celebrate all of that. Amy, what do you want to celebrate?
I mean, I am right there with you. I want to also celebrate resiliency. I mean, in this truly traumatic time, we've faced tyranny and fascism head on and struggled through an unprecedented global pandemic with nearly no relief from our government. We leaned into mutual aid and resistance and uprising in the streets to create a movement that led folks directly to the ballot box. And I want us to celebrate our electoral wins. We've been winning all over the place, not just nationally with electing Joe Biden and flipping states all over the place, like flip, flip, flip. But we've also won in what some people would say small things, but were actually quite huge things, like, changing the faces of school boards across the country, electing DAs who are not going to throw our folks in jail immediately. Like, it's not just, the presidency, which was a huge win. Goodbye to Donald Trump. Don't let the door hit you. But we also have wins that we're going to see like real concrete results in real time with these smaller local elections. And we're going to take the energy from all of this, from the wins, from the losses, from the struggles that we've dealt with, and really use them to energize folks in the future for what we know is coming, and get the relief that we need. Jacob, what are you cheering for?
Yeah, I'm just like, I guess stepping back and reflecting, similar to you, Abril, it's like thinking back over the last decade, the growth of independent political organizations is just astounding. Like, I was part of creating the People's Lobby in Chicago in 2012, and there was just like a handful of independent political organizations around the country, and like 4 of them were in Minnesota. And today, like, there's just so many powerful groups that are doing tremendous work, and we were the margin of victory in many of our states. In Pennsylvania, our group alone almost had moved as many votes as Biden won the state by. And when you combine us with our allies, it was 5 times the numbers of votes that Biden won the state by. And I think that's true in a bunch of the states that we're working in. Like, we are the people who are making the margin of difference, and it's time to celebrate that and to demand a voice at the table. And then also, like, I just think it's worth celebrating the work that communicators are doing as part of that as well. Like, and a big shout out to ReFrame, to programs like Kairos. Like, we're not just talking to voters one-on-one. We are really growing our skills and our power to shape the narrative on a large level as well. How about you, Janae? What are you celebrating?
I'm celebrating all of y'all, because y'all are dope and amazing. And I know it's a bunch of other folks out there who have been doing amazing times in other states as well. This idea of the fact that we came to win, I'm celebrating that. Like, we came unapologetically about folks getting the things that they need, about actually building a real multiracial democracy for every single person. The fact that we showed up in record numbers, like turned up in record numbers, it's absolutely incredible. And like, just celebrating the massive amount of narrative advancement for our values that we've made. We've done more in recent months than we have in decades. And that is something that all of us can celebrate and really be proud of. I know our 4 states here, particularly the GOP, dumped a bunch of money in our states to try to defeat us. A bunch of money. I know Minnesota, we was number 2 next to Florida. And we said bye-bye anyway. So it is. It also just shows that people power is going to beat out money every time, as long as we continue to lean into each other. And quite frankly, I'm super excited about Minnesota having some real independent Black political power. It has come to the surface that in Minnesota, every single presidential election since 2012, it has literally been the Black vote that has kept our state blue. And so in 2016, the number of Black people who voted like actually pulled us across the finish line, because in 2016, the majority of white folks voted for Donald Trump. And so, you know, recognizing that we have that kind of power and like wielding it. So it's not, we ain't just checking boxes in November. We come in for everything that we deserve in January, February, March, April, right? And so I'm excited and I'm celebrating all of that. All of it. And then also just the fact that like we got the country to march in defense of Black lives this summer. Like, never have we, again, the narrative swing, the pendulum swings so hard to country to march in defense of Black lives. And so, you know, with our branding, our favorite line is, we got the country to march in defense of Black lives, and we are voting to deliver Black dreams. And most certainly we are going to wield that power. We are staying true to it and continuing to move forward. So I'm really elated and celebrating all of us and all that we've done. And I think we're ready to bring back our incredible host.
I'm shook over here. EVA, how are you feeling?
I know. Y'all came, y'all showed up, and y'all definitely showed out.
Y'all showed out. I really want to thank y'all for joining us this evening, and I really want to celebrate y'all for real. I want to celebrate y'all. I want to give you a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you all. We appreciate the work that y'all have done. It's super powerful and super inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us. I think you all are going to exit while we wrap up. So I just want to say to folks at home, thank you so much for joining us this evening for We Came to Win, Reflections on Narrative Power in the 2020 election. I also want to thank our brilliant panelists once again for joining us. These are just a few examples of the incredible and often overlooked stories of organizing that went into the hard-fought democratic victory. We look forward to hearing more about the organizing work that these folks will continue to do in the years to come, and we look forward to seeing you all join us next time. I wonder what's going to be next. EBA, how are you feeling? How you feeling? We're going to wrap up, but do you want to let folks know what we have and going on and where they can find us?
Yeah, for sure. So for more information and to sign up for updates on ReFrame, you can go ahead and check out our website, and all of our socials are there as well on reframementorship.org. And for more information and updates about This Is Signals, you can check out thisissignals.com, and all of the socials are linked there as well. Thank y'all, everybody, for joining us this evening, and we'll see you soon. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
I hit recorded, drop, you can't ignore it. I'm transforming now these cars and planes, I'm always boarding. Just out touring down in Charlotte like I play for Hornets. When I'm performing, never boring, now you can't afford it. Champagne Perrier, finished friends on my face.